can have your attention. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming today and participating in this session that we're having. Many of you who see me in the community know that I'm always talking about community participation supports and doing whatever we can to help the people that we serve not only be in the community, but of the community. In doing this, we have tried to find our best practice in doing so by having a teachable spirit and being willing to learn what might be the best way to go about that for the people that we serve. So in doing so, I had known Dr. Condeluci from some time ago when I started in the field. And so I asked him to come and speak. Maybe it was last August, I think. And he came and spoke to the class, our staff, and they said, he was the best person we ever heard. Can he come back again? So we were like, sure. And we talked about this, and we decided that we were going to embark on a series of classes, and that's what we've been doing, to learn how to find opportunities in the community, to talk to the people we serve about what they want to do, and match things up accordingly. Al has wrote several books and taught in many places. I'm sure that you all read the information that I sent out. So I just want to take this opportunity to introduce him, and if everybody can welcome him, and feel free to get up and give something whenever you want. Thank you, Al.
Thanks, Cindy. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thanks so much for coming out and kind of getting caught up on some of the work that we've been doing here at Whole Life and some of the things that we have coming down the road. As Cindy indicated, my name's Al Condeluci. I'm from Pittsburgh, actually, and if you're familiar with the city of Pittsburgh, I grew up in McKees Rocks, and I still live in McKees Rocks. It's a small little community just west of the city. It's a steel town, very blue collar, and I've been involved in disability advocacy for the last 55 years professionally. But I've been really a disability advocate my entire life. And when you came in today, you probably got a PowerPoint, or you got a copied PowerPoint. And if you look at that PowerPoint, you'll see the picture of my cousin Carrie. Right? My cousin Carrie had Down syndrome. We were born actually just 1 month apart. And we live in this big Italian family up on a hill in Pittsburgh, just about 6 miles from downtown. In fact, from our hill, you can see, Heinz Field, and you can see the Point, and you can see, the PNC Park and the fireworks at 4th of July, right from our hill. But on our hill, when I was born, when Carrie and I were born, there were 8 Condeluci families who lived up there. And it was really a wonderful way to start life, right? To be in a family, in a community, in a place where everybody sort of loved and respected you, regardless of who you were, and regardless of how you functioned, right? And so growing up with Carrie, for me, was really a powerful sort of instruction about who's welcomed and who's not. Because on Condeluci Hill, Carrie was just another kid. She was just one of our family. But when we got old enough to go to school, Carrie didn't go to school. Schools didn't accept people like Carrie when we were kids. Right? This was back in the mid-50s when we started to go to school, elementary school, and then middle school and high school. And folks with disabilities really weren't welcomed in schools. But even more powerful, when we got a little bit older and we started to go to social events in communities, festivals and football games on Friday, and the kinds of things that we just do typically in community, Carrie was mistreated there as well. Other kids would make fun of her. She would be taunted. Carrie had a cleft palate, so she couldn't speak very clearly. Although every one of us on Condeluci Hill we understood anything Carrie said, but the rest of the community didn't. We'd go off the hill, kids would make fun of Carrie. And those experiences, the fact that Carrie wasn't welcomed in school, the fact that other kids would make fun of Carrie and that she was really perceived to be irrelevant in the community, that's really what got me on the path of advocacy. And so in the ensuing years, I wanted to become a disability advocate. And so when I graduated from high school, went off to college. In fact, I went to Youngstown State University. It was the only school that would accept me. But I'm an illustrious graduate now. But when I went to college, I was studied disability, right? I wanted to be an advocate. And when I was in school, the primary thing that we were taught was what's called the micro approach to disability. Right? Now, I don't want to get too technical or too pedagogical here with you, but the micro approach is essentially when you look at somebody and you look at their problems, right? And so in a micro approach, which is essentially like a medical model, the assessment is what does the person struggle with? People would then look at somebody like Carrie and say, okay, well, she has a problem. She can't really understand abstract things. She can't speak very clearly because of her cleft palate. She has seizures, right? So these were all perceived as problems. And so the disability paradigm of support is let's try to fix people's problems, right? And the family members in here, I'm sure, know this paradigm all too well. Because when your son or your daughter was born, you were told that she or he had a problem, right? And you might have even been given the name of the problem. The problem has a name. And that problem then becomes the focal point of all the activity, right? Let's try to get rid of the problem. Let's try to ameliorate or lessen the problem. And so this micro model is very much focused on the person as the problem. Right? And that, by the way, spills into the community at large. So if you don't even have a disability or nobody in your family has experienced a disability, when you see somebody with a disability, some of the initial reactions are, well, that person has a problem, right? They can't talk, they can't walk, they can't dress themselves, whatever the manifestations might be. And that notion of the person having the problem then drives you to say that there's something wrong with them. There's something wrong with them. And that, to me, then, that notion that people see my cousin Carrie as having problems and that there's something wrong with her, starts the process in a very, very negative way and a very, very segregative way. Because then what people think is, well, she has a problem, she should go somewhere to get some help for her problem. Right? And that notion of Carrie having to go somewhere because of her problem has been the historic way that disability has been dealt with in our culture. Right? We've created places for people with disabilities. Agencies, organizations, group homes, sheltered workshops, special education, Special Olympics. All of those things are separated and segregated from the greater world. And most typical people in the community, they see things like that and say, well, that's a good thing. That's the way it should be. Those kids should have a chance to, live and be and learn. But that's not community inclusion. That's segregation, right? It's segregating people. It's segregating them intellectually or attitudinally, and then physically segregating people. And so as I've been really called to understand this and to think about it more academically, when I went back to college, to graduate school, and began working on my doctorate, I got exposed to another paradigm, another approach. Instead of seeing people with disabilities as the problem, what we now are beginning to understand is that the problem really is in the greater community's attitude toward people, what the greater community thinks about people. That's a macro perspective. A micro perspective says Carrie has the problem. A macro perspective says everybody else has an attitudinal perception of Carrie that might be the problem. And this has really been, as I've looked at this, both as a family member as well as a scholar, it's powerful and it makes sense, right? The perfect example is Carrie's speech. Everybody on Condeluci Hill could understand Carrie. Nobody in the greater community could understand Carrie. So why? Why that differential? Well, the difference is that we all have a relationship with Carrie, and the rest of the community sees Carrie as a client, as a person with Down syndrome, as somebody different from them, and so they dismiss her that way. And so this notion of macro change is really, the focal point is, how can we help people who are experiencing disabilities build relationships with everyday people in the community, with folks that are just out and about in everyday kinds of ways. That change really gets us to thinking about relationships. And that's really become an area of real focus for me. At the University of Pittsburgh, where I teach, it's the area I do my research on. It's the area I've written about. As Cindy said, I've written 8 books about relationships and community and the inclusion of people who are different from society. And in studying this, the technical term is called social capital. Social capital. And social capital, we all have social capital. And social capital are the people in our lives that we have a relationship with. Some of those people we just know, they're acquaintances. Other people we do things with. And some people we love and trust, right? Those are the 3 qualitative dimensions of social capital. Acquaintances, people we do things with and engage with, and people we love and trust, right? That's a covenancy zone. And listen to this. What social science has discovered in research is that average person, typical person in this room, has 150 important relationships. You have 150 important relationships. And when I say that out loud, and when I disclose that information, people start going like this. You start thinking, 150? I can't even count 5. But actually, it's true. If I sat with any of you and we looked at your social capital network, right? Your sociogram is what sociologists call that. We would discover you have lots of people in your life. 150, probably for many of you, is a low number. And when I read that, when I learned that information, by the way, that comes from an anthropologist at Cambridge University in the UK. His name is Robin Dunbar. But lots of other sociologists have corroborated and have literally identified that as a viable number. When I came across that, I began to think, gee, if I have 150 important relationships in my life, I wonder how many Carrie has in her life. How many important relationships does she have? Right? Or my dad, who had Parkinson's. How many important relationships did he have? He had Parkinson's. The Parkinson's, by the way, created further disconnection from people. When people began to see my dad, he would go to church and he would shake. They began to back away. That happens a lot in terms of relationships. And so I went to the literature to say, gee, how many relationships do people with disabilities typically have? And when I went to the literature to look at that, the database, what I discovered was nobody had studied it. Nobody had even thought about the importance of relationships for people with disabilities. That somehow, some way, our focus is let's fix their problem rather than let's help people find ways of building relationships just as they are. Let me give an example with Carrie. I mentioned that Carrie had a cleft palate, so she couldn't speak very well. We all understood her on the Hill, but other people didn't, and the therapist told us that she should go to speech therapy. They told our family that. And you know, if you stop and you think about it, you have a speech problem, go to speech therapy, right? That seems to make sense. And so Carrie went to speech therapy. Thousands of hours of speech therapy over a number of years. And often I would go with her, or I would be there to support her during those therapeutic hours. After all that time, after all that money, after all that energy, Carrie's speech changed maybe this much, right? This much. And in the process, Carrie felt like a failure. Carrie felt like she was letting people down, that she was not adequate. That was what was happening in that process. And so, how was it that we understood Carrie and nobody else did, and speech therapy didn't help at all? What that really suggested to me is that we listened a little differently because we had social capital with Carrie. We had a relationship with her. But when we began to look at how many relationships does Carrie have in her life, and I looked at the literature and didn't find any, I decided I was going to study it. And so I got together with some other like-minded scholars at different parts of the world. We had some people in Brisbane, we had some people in Vancouver, some people in Toronto, a couple cities around the United States. And we looked at 250 people with disabilities in those 7 different cities in those 3 different countries. And what we discovered is that the average number of reported relationships, when we had an interview with people like Carrie, was 24. 24. You have 150. Carrie has 24. And so for me, the real lesson of that research and the focal point of some of the stuff that Cindy and I and her team are really looking at is how can we help people build relationships, right? How can we facilitate that people that we support here at Whole Life become not just in the community, as Cindy said, but to become of the community. And the only way people become of something is when they have relationships with people in those settings, right? And so this idea of social capital really is the goal, right? It's like the great white whale that we're going to start going after. And we're so happy that you're here tonight as we launch some of our efforts at thinking about relationships. And you, as community leaders, as community members, as stakeholders in this region, you have a vested interest in this. Because when the folks that we support here at Whole Life go across the bridge and join your world, they make your world better. They make you better. That's called macro change, right? Macro change is when people, everyday people, begin to broaden their sort of thinking about their community. And they recognize that we have difference in community, but our similarities so far outweigh our differences. You know, when you think about relationships, there's one fundamental thing that all people share. All people. Doesn't matter who you are, where you live, how old you are, you know, your cognitive functioning, your physical functioning. All people want to be treated with respect. All people want to participate. All people want to be not just respected, but included and valued and being a part of something. Think back to when you were a kid and you were on the playground and they were selecting teams and you didn't get picked for whatever reason, how you felt. I remember, you know, when I was writing a book about this, the book was called Beyond Difference. I wrote it back in 1995. And when I was doing research on that book, and I wanted people to begin to sort of think about inclusion and what that means. belonging and what that means. I hearken back to an experience I had as a kid at my first high school dance. My first high school dance. And, you know, I was awkward and, you know, nervous and, you know, wasn't sure whether the girls were going to like me, right? I mean, all those things you kind of go through when you're an adolescent, right? Struggling with that. And so I go to my first high school dance. And, of course, all the boys are over here. All the girls are over here in the high school gym, right? And so I'm just kind of standing there awkward. And they play a lady's choice. A lady's choice. And the most attractive girl in my class comes walking, and she's walking over toward me, and I said, oh my God, she's coming over to me. And she comes over and she says, hi, my name's Sandy. And I said, well, hi, Sandy. I know your name. My name's Al. She said, oh, okay, I didn't know who you were. And I said, that's okay, I didn't. And she said, would you like to dance? I said, would I like to dance? Of course. And now, before the dance, my sister, Jan, taught me the box step. Right? You remember the box step, right? So I was ready. I knew the box step. Here was Sandy Tempolsky, the nicest looking girl in our class. She's asking me to dance, the most awkward kid at the dance. And so we go out to the dance floor, and, you know, we interlock, of course, you know, at keeping your distance. And I went through like the first one, right? And when I got to the fourth step, she dropped my arm. She said, I just wanted to see if you knew how to dance. She walked off the dance floor. And there I was. I felt like naked. You know, I felt stupid. I felt hurt. Right? And that notion of sort of just being included just had made me feel so good initially. And this feeling was the total opposite of that. Right? And so when we think about the kinds of work that we're doing here at Whole Life and this initiative of relationships, it really gets to some of those really basic things, those basic experiences of life, where you have a chance to be a part of something, where you're included and welcomed, where you're treated with respect and dignity, no matter whether you could, you know, read War and Peace or not, whether you understood something complex or not, that you're welcomed in the community, you're welcomed in the process. So one of the things, the last thing I want to share with you before we open it up to some questions, is that this isn't just about, well, I feel good, you know, we want people to feel good, and kumbaya, and we want you to... There's really a process here that we're following. It's really designed to really be intelligent, right? There are 4 steps to relationship building, and we're following these steps in our project here. We're doing basically a pilot project, right? And we're going to measure the connectedness that people have right now, and then we're going to introduce these 4 steps. And these 4 steps are really focused on trying to get people connected and engaged, right? So if you turn your PowerPoint, I'll show you the 4 steps, and then I'm going to just share them with you really quickly. If you go on to, let's see, what page is this? The 4 steps to social capital. It's right after this picture of this algorithm. It's, I don't know if these pages are numbered. Yeah, they are. Page 6. See the 4 steps to social capital. Right? Now, these 4 steps are universal. This is not a disability strategy. In fact, I teach this at the university. I'm teaching a course this summer at Pitt, human relations. Right? I have 35, juniors in the School of Health and Rehab Sciences in my class, and we just went over these 4 steps on our lecture on Monday. Right? And these kids they're not studying to become disability advocates. These kids are going to become health professionals. They're going to be hospital administrators. They're going to be, pharmacists. They're going to go in a whole variety of directions. But what we're doing is really looking at the fact that when you build relationships, your life gets better. Your life gets better. Your life gets better. That's not to mention my cousin Carrie. We're talking about you now. Your life actually gets better through your relationships. You're healthier because of relationships. You're happier because of relationships. You have a better self-identity because of your relationships. You advance more. You achieve more. We now know that kids in school do better in tests based on their connectedness with other kids. We also know the opposite of relationships is lethal. Social isolation. When people are socially isolated, they're at risk of dying. In fact, do you know this? Social isolation, just generally, we're talking about this generally as a community. Social isolation is tantamount to death. That when people are rendered isolated, for whatever reason, they're not welcome, they're not a part of something, they're left behind, they're separated, those folks are at risk of dying. As many people in the United States of America today, 2019, die from social isolation as from all smoke-related diseases and illnesses. That social isolation now outpolls obesity and cardiovascular disease as the primary killer of people. Social isolation. And social isolation can be measured. Social capital can be measured. I told you have 150 relationships. Carrie has 24. So she's at risk of social isolation. So she's at risk of bad things happening in her life. When people are connected, good things happen. When people are isolated, bad things happen. That's just a simple social axiom. And so this notion of social capital, it does all these good things. Listen to this. One of the things that we really focus on here at Whole Life is helping people get jobs. Right? We want to see people work. They want to work. In fact, everybody wants to work. Working is in our DNA. We want to participate. We want to work. We want to contribute. Humans want that generally. That's natural law of behavior. Right? Yet, today, here in the valley, as well as around this country, as well as around the world, people with disabilities are unemployed. 76% of people with disabilities in the United States are presently unemployed. So people want to work. Now, how do people get jobs? Not through skill sets. They get jobs through social capital. Think about your first job, whatever it might have been. Maybe babysitting or cutting grass, walking dogs. I don't know what it was. One of my first jobs was setting pins, bowling pins. Right? How did you get your very first job? And I bet you somewhere along that track, somebody your mom or dad knew helped you get the job. Right? People get jobs through relationships. Even the most recent job that you've had, wherever it might be, or wherever it might have been, when you filled out the application for that job, you had to list 3 names on that application form. References, right? That's your social capital that will lie for you. And lie they did. Do you remember when you called them up, you said, look, I'm going for that big job at Sharon Medical Center, and I listed you as a reference, and if they call you, please say something nice about me? People get jobs through social capital. People lose jobs because they can't establish relationships because of social capital. People actually advance and achieve more because of social capital. It's not what you know, it's who you know, right? That adage that's been with us from time immemorial, because this stuff is viable. But listen to this last one. Social capital is related or tied to life expectancy. That all the recent studies now conclude very convincingly that what leads to a longer life is not all the things we thought it was. Getting a lot of sleep, eating well, exercising, don't smoke. You know, we hear all those things. If you want to live longer, don't do those things or do some of those things. The bottom line of a longer life is relevant relationships. When people have relationships that are relevant, they thrive. And in fact, if you have any questions on this, just go to TED Talks. You ever online? I don't know if you've ever looked at TED Talks, but if you go to TED and you just keyword search life expectancy, there's probably 25 or 30 talks about relationships and life expectancy. So relationships are so fundamentally important to human beings. They're important to all of us. And we know that the men and women we support here at Whole Life don't have as many. We know that. And so our goal, our challenge, is to really help people build social capital. And not with other people with disabilities. Because when you build relationships with like people, that's good. You feel secure, but you don't grow. How you grow is when you build relationships with somebody different from you. So if I only had Italians in my social capital, that would be nice, but boy, that would be narrow, right? That would really be narrow. What really makes me grow as a human being is when I meet you non-Italians, right? And learn from you and discover from you. So having some kind of a mentality that, well, let's keep all Down syndrome people over here, that is absolutely anti-life. That kind of an approach is just maddening to me. Because when Carrie gets into your community, she helps you grow. You get better. You listen better. You understand things better because of Carrie, right? So the notion of inclusion in our culture, in our community, is really an investment in our community. And the building of social capital has 4 steps. And on that page 6, just very quickly, step 1 is how do people meet? How do people begin to meet? And they meet through similarity. Similarity. Every relationship in your life, all 150 of them, you have some common bridge with that person. You went to the same school, you grew up together, you went to the same church, whatever the case might be, there is a bridge of commonality in every relationship in your life. Think back. Think back to people that are in your life now. How did you meet? Where did you meet? What was the elixir? And I guarantee you, the elixir of that connection was the similarity you shared with that person around something in common. You were in scouts together. You played basketball together. Yeah, whatever that case might be. Similarity is what connects people, not difference. In fact, difference challenges relationships. Difference can create problems in relationships. So the notion of mitigating difference is finding more similarity. I mean, think about how you go to a party or you go to an event and you meet somebody new. The very first thing you do is start to fish for commonality, right? You start asking questions, where do you grow up, where do you go up, what do you do, yada, yada, those simple sort of ice-breaking conversations. Let me give this example. Last September, I was invited to speak in Rome, Italy, at a pediatric brain injury conference. Right? And it was, I was very humbled at the invitation and having this chance to go to Italy and share ideas with neurologists and pediatricians. That was fantastic. So I traveled to Italy, go to the conference, 500 delegates at the conference, mostly pediatricians and neurologists. I did a presentation on social capital, so similar to the stuff we're talking about right now. I finished the talk, rousing applause, and so we take a break and go to the coffee urn. Everybody goes get coffee. So I'm at the coffee urn, and this very dignified man kind of comes up and he says, Dr. Condeluci. And I said, yeah. He said, that was a marvelous presentation, so cogent, so focused. I said, well, thank you. He said, you're from the United States. I said, yeah. He said, Pennsylvania. I said, yeah, that's my home state. He said, Pittsburgh. I said, yeah, Pittsburgh, that's my home. He said, do you know the Roselli family? Like I know every Italian in Pittsburgh. But the notion is that's what we do, right? We fish for commonality with people. We look for those things that create a bridge between us. So finding that commonality, finding that sort of interest area becomes the first step. So what we're doing here at Whole Life is we've identified some folks that we're supporting, and we're doing a cultural profile on those folks. Not an assessment of their problems, that's the micro model. We're doing an exploration of their passions and interests and connectors, right? So a cultural profile would be something, a very simple way of thinking of that is to think about 3 things you really like to do or you really are interested in right now in your life, right? So what would you say? What would be one of the things you would say that you're really interested in right now? Gardening. Fantastic. Vegetables or flowers? Vegetables. Fantastic. How about you, sir? What's one thing that you're really, passionate, interested in right now? Nice. That's relaxing. Yeah. Yeah, I get it. It's just a relaxing thing. How about one of the things for you, Connie? Travel. Yeah. That's good. Wonderful examples. We could go around the room and everybody would be able to weigh in, right? Because there are things we're interested in, things that we like to do. So that kind of conversation that we just had is really discovering who you are culturally, right? Now, I could have a clinical discussion with each of you. I could ask you your blood pressure. I could ask you your cholesterol level. Right? I could be looking at you in a microclinical way, but that's not going to really help you get friends, right? Unless you just have friends with other people with high blood pressure. And maybe you do, I don't know. But finding what you're interested in creates a bridge of commonality. I mean, this is no different. If I moved up here to the valley from Pittsburgh, and I know how important social capital is, and I don't have any friends, how would I make new friends? Well, I would think about, what do I like? What do I care about? What am I interested in? And then I would look for other people who like what I like, right? So I like jazz music, I like golf, I like to read, right? I like gardening, nice little tomato, San Marzano tomatoes, right? So those kinds of things then create a possible bridge. So discovering who people are culturally, step 1. Step 2, where in the valley do people gather who like to garden, or who like to just relax and hang out, or who like to travel? Where are people in the valley who like those things, right? Where are those communities in the valley? So step 1 is finding the passion. Step 2 is then finding the other side of the bridge. Right? Once we find that other side of the bridge, now we're ready to understand what's expected there. So if you're in a gardening club, and that gardening club meets on a regular basis, then it's developed some rituals and some patterns, and there are some predictable things about regularity. Right? So what are those things? And then how can we coach some of the folks we're supporting to, in fact, then begin to do those things? Let me give an example. When I was a kid, my dad took me to church for the first time. Right? I was maybe 6 or 7, and I have a memory of this. Usually our memory doesn't go much back beyond, age 6. But I remember my dad taking me to church and opening that big door in the church. And then inside the church was a little dish of water. Right? And my dad said, "That's holy water." And I said, "Holy water? Daddy, that water doesn't have any holes." Holy water, right? That's jargon, right? But cultures develop jargon. They develop words that they use. So my dad said, "Son, I want you to take 3 fingers like this, keep them together, never ever one finger, never ever this finger, but 3 fingers together, and dip those fingers in the water, the holy water. And then I want you to take your wet fingertips and bring them up to your forehead and say, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Right? My dad was teaching me a ritual in that culture. Right? Now, that ritual, what was most important about that ritual, and all the other rituals, by the way, is not so much that you internalize the ritual. What's more important about rituals is that they signal a sense of similarity between us. We all do this. Everybody's doing this. That's a sense of similarity. And similarities attract people. Differences cause people to back away. Similarities invite people to be together. Differences push people away. So part of our project is how can we, understanding the community, the gardening club, how can we also now coach the folks that we're supporting to really understand what's expected of them in that setting? That's step 3. And then step 4 is finding a gatekeeper. Right? A gatekeeper is somebody already in the community who's valued. And that gatekeeper literally creates what we call a value connection between a newcomer and the expected person. Let me give an example. It happened here tonight. Cindy introduced me to you. Right? I'm a newcomer. Most of you guys don't know me. Cindy, you know. Right? You know her passion. You know her commitment to this community. You know the contribution that she's making and the organization is making to your community. So Cindy's value is pretty. In fact, you came here tonight because Cindy invited you. That's why you came tonight. She invited you. Your value of her got you here. Cindy introduces me. Cindy's value is high. It got you into this room tonight. You could be laying on your hammock. It's a beautiful night. And here you are, listening and kind of trying to learn how you can make your community better, right? So Cindy's value got you here. Cindy introduces me, and guess what happens to my value? It starts to go up. It doesn't go all the way up as high as Cindy's, obviously, but it goes up enough for you to say, okay, I think I'll listen to this guy. If Cindy likes him, if Cindy invited him, he must be okay. So in some ways, Cindy was really my gatekeeper with you tonight. And we've had you had gatekeepers all through your life in different ways. Your very first gatekeeper is your mom and dad, as they began to introduce you to the community. And if people liked your mom and dad, they probably liked you. Right? In fact, that's how advertising works. Advertising works. The theory is called value image juxtaposition. Big word, simple concept. If somebody like Matthew McConaughey gets into a Lincoln, the value of a Lincoln goes up in the eyes of people who like Matthew McConaughey. All right. So the notion of advertising is, how do we juxtapose somebody who's valued or something that's valued with a product? And that product's value starts to go up in your eyes because of the valued person or image that you like. So the notion of value juxtaposition is a sociological, theoretical approach to creating some parity in our culture. Right? And so what we're planning to do and what we're embarking on here at Whole Life is not shoot from the hip. Okay, people need friends, they get them CUNY, they'll build friends, just put them out there. We're being intelligent about this. We're really looking at how do relationships start, how do they form, how do they get stronger, and how might we coach and prepare people for those experiences. Right? So we really, really are excited that you're here. The families that are here tonight, thank you for taking time, because this is the direction that we're going in. In fact, it's the direction that the system has to go in, Because for all these years, agencies like Whole Life have been out there. We've always had the goal of trying to get people involved in the community. That's been a goal from the time Cindy founded the organization. Right? That's been a goal. But we've been struggling to achieve that goal. And so this sort of notion of shifting from micro to macro and thinking about culture and community and people and relationships really becomes the fuel for building a community where everybody belongs. And so we really, really appreciate you taking time from your schedules to be here. That this is a journey that's not about one person or just one issue. It's a journey about all of us. And it's something that everyone plays a role in. Because when you do things, people see that. People observe. People model what you do, more than you know. And when you begin to model some of this sort of bridge building and inclusion, other people begin to do it too. They begin to sort of see it. I mean, it's powerful, the modeling that happens. Let me just close with a little example of modeling and a lesson that I really learned in the hard way. My wife and I have 3 children, and our firstborn, now 37-year-old man, he's got 2 kids of his own, my son Dante. But when he was a baby, Dante had trouble sleeping. We had a hard time getting him to sleep. And in fact, the only way we could get Dante to sleep was I would have to ride him around in the car. And he'd get in the car, and finally he'd get dozed, and he'd get sleepy, and I'd pull into the garage, and I'd pick him up gingerly and take him up and try to put him in his little bassinet, and then he'd wake up and start crying again. I'd get back in the car and drive around. So countless hours and countless gallons of gasoline were used in trying to get Dante to go to sleep. Then my wife came up with a brilliant solution. One day she was out shopping, and she found this little toy called the dashboard. It fit on his spider chair. And it looked exactly like a dashboard in the car. It had a little steering wheel, had a horn, had a radio. The radio actually worked. Had a little glove compartment. He could put his Matchbox cars in it. And Dante loved this dashboard. And he played with it until he passed out. He would get in there, we'd put him in the spider chair. He'd be, pushing him, beeping the horn. And finally he'd get tired and he'd go to bed. So it saved me thousands of dollars in gasoline. This was fantastic. So one evening I got home from work, my wife and I were preparing dinner, and Dante's in the back room in his spider chair. And he's playing, we could hear him playing. And then he had just started talking, by the way, at this point. And then he started to hit the horn, and he said, "Get out of the way, you bastard. Get out of the way, you bastard." And I said, "Liz, listen to your son. He just started talking. He hasn't even said daddy, and now he's saying bastard." And my wife said, "Al, listen to yourself when you drive." Because he's strapped in back there. He hears everything that you say, right? That notion of how powerful we are as models, the influence that we have on other people is just amazing. Often we don't even think about it. We just take it for granted. And so the notion of you being here tonight is really to help us as gatekeepers in this project, right? As we continue to move forward in building a community here in the Valley where everybody belongs. And people begin to take their rightful place next to you, with you, beside you in our community. Because when the folks that we support are there, they make you better. And they make your community better. And so we thank you so much. I'm open for some questions. I know we told you that we were going to get you out of here by 6:15. We want to stay with that bargain. We know you worked hard. Some of you laid around all day, but most of you worked really hard. And we don't want to keep you longer than we should. But I'm also open to any questions or comments that you might have about the project that we're doing, about the way that we're thinking about it. You have a couple articles. They come from some white papers that I've done. If you visit my website, and at the very last slide, is my contact information. So if you visit my website, which is just my name, alcondeluci.com, I have a lot of other articles there. I have some videos. I have my TED Talk. I did a TED Talk a couple years ago in Pittsburgh about social capital. That's uploaded on the website. As Cindy said, I've written a number of books. I brought a couple books tonight just to show you. And by the way, I don't get any royalties on the books that I write. I've donated the royalties to the organization I work for 47 years, CLASS. But I wrote, my most recent book is on social capital. It really examines the whole concept of social capital and relationships. Also, a new book called The Macro Change Handbook. So these books you can find them on the website. When and if you purchase them, you're actually making a donation to this cause, to the cause of a full and inclusive community.